things that I don't think you even knew existed. It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans. And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it, and we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally. Erased it intentionally. That's an important part of it. America's history didn't begin with Christopher Columbus came over. There were ancient cities with advanced architectures all across North America. Did you know that? Hundreds of years before Columbus came. You always think, oh, the Indians, they didn't scar the land. No, not true. These were cities as large as any in the world at the time. London or Rome, they were metropolises. Archaeologists say they have found evidence of 200,000 actual cities of mound-like structures all across North America that were here long before Columbus. But we don't know anything about them. Why? Why?
Entire cities we didn't know about.
Entire cities that have never been found before that are all of a sudden being revealed in the Peten?
Yes, want to see?
Yeah.
Let's go to the north.
Hawaii, yes, family. Entire cities are being found in the Guatemalan jungle as we speak. All right, as you see here, look at this. It's vast. This is all on the jungle. This is the area right here, what you call the Yucatan and the border of Guatemala, the Petén region, they call it in Guatemala. All this unexplored area, which is all this forest and jungle. You see the cypress trees. You see all kinds of different vegetation. You see tropical as well. And under all this jungle, in this area of the world, you see where they got the highlighted parts. That's the only parts where they've done the LiDAR scanning. That's the only places. They still haven't explored the other parts. As this is what they're finding. You see what's under here. You see all these structures. All right, Guatemala, roads, highways connecting all these cities under this vast jungle. You see pyramids, monuments. Look how they play with their technology. They're so happy. All right, you see what they're finding under these jungles. 60,000 structures, approximately. All right, millions and millions of people were in this region of the world. All right.
Your work has depended on scholars coming out with paper after paper since you were last on so much new information that has supported your original thesis.
Yeah.
What next, do you think? It's very difficult
I
to
think we are poised on the edge of what is called in science a paradigm shift. I think that the monolithic control of the past that archaeology has exercised is being eaten away by new sciences like genetics and indeed geology. And the result of that is that all the evidence that's coming out shows that the human species is much older than we thought, that their abilities were much more advanced than we thought, that whole areas of the world that have never been studied by archaeologists at all may have been the source of an advanced civilization in the past. The evidence keeps on mounting up. It won't go away. I keep thinking I'm finished with this story. I thought I was finished with this story in 2002 after a book called Underworld, and then Göbekli Tepe came along. And I needed to write Magicians of the Gods. And then after publishing Magicians of the Gods in 2015, there's just massive amount of new evidence from the Americas showing that the whole story of the peopling of the Americas were wrong, and that the Americas are full of cunningly designed, highly scientific monuments, geometry, astronomy on an extraordinary scale that speaks to enormously sophisticated people.
Graham Hancock, thank you.
The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Cremo. In part 1 of The Hidden History of the Human Race, we look closely at the vast amount of controversial evidence that contradicts current ideas about human evolution. We recount in detail how this evidence has been systematically suppressed, ignored, or forgotten, even though it is qualitatively and quantitatively equivalent to the evidence favoring currently accepted views on human origins. When we speak of suppression of evidence, we are not referring to scientific conspirators carrying out a satanic plot to deceive the public. Instead, we are talking about an ongoing social process of knowledge filtration that appears quite innocuous but has a substantial cumulative effect. Certain categories of evidence simply disappear from view, in our opinion, unjustifiably. This pattern of data suppression has been going on for a long time. In 1880, J.D. Whitney, the state geologist of California, published a lengthy review of advanced stone tools found in California gold mines. The implements, including spear points and stone mortars and pestles, were found deep in mine shafts, underneath thick, undisturbed layers of lava. Informations ranging from 9 million to over 55 million years old.
And I remember you saying before that with every year we're finding out that things are older than we thought they were.
All the time.
And it always seems to be confirming a lot of what you've been talking about.
So-
a natural tendency for them to shy away from these things.
Yes.
Because also keeping things in the status quo keeps everything
Yes.
the way it should be.
Yes.
Keeps them in their same jobs, their institutions alive.
Absolutely.
And so they just naturally become uncomfortable
Yeah.
and resist when they hear these new theories.
Very much so. And this is a classic example that I go into in this new book of archaeology going radically, drastically wrong. And it's partly connected to that so-called overkill theory, where the megafauna were supposedly wiped out by this ruthless hunter-gatherer population. And it's an archaeological theory called Clovis first. And it dominated American archaeology for 50 years. The notion that there's a culture that archaeologists call the Clovis culture. We don't know what they call themselves. They're called the Clovis culture because what's called the type site, the classic site that they were at, is near the town of Clovis, New Mexico, in a place called Blackwater Draw, near Clovis, New Mexico. And apparently the archaeologists needed to go to Clovis to get beer, so they called it the Clovis culture.
Okay.
And this Clovis culture, there's no evidence of it in North America before 13,600 years ago. It flourishes for about 800 years, and 12,800 years ago, it vanishes completely from the picture. The position of archaeology for 50 years is those were the first human beings to enter America. No human beings entered the Americas before 13,600 years ago. And those are the same archaeologists who repeatedly called me a pseudoscientist or a pseudo-archaeologist for suggesting other possibilities. But lo and behold, what do we find? Round about 2010 onwards, the evidence becomes overwhelming that Clovis was not first at all, not first by even a tiny margin, a huge margin, first by a huge margin, not 25,000, 35,000, 50,000. As part of the research for this book, I went to the San Diego Natural History Museum and interviewed Dr. Tom Desmarais, who's the chief paleontologist there. The reason I interviewed him was because he'd just had an extraordinary paper published in Nature in April 2017. And that paper documents human presence in North America 130,000 years ago. That's 10 times as old as the Clovis culture. And all archaeologists admit this now, that the Clovis first was a mistake. They got it wrong, completely wrong. Human beings have been in America for much longer than that. But what they don't comment upon is the careers that were ruined as a result. People like Jacques Saint-Mars, who excavated Bluefish Caves in the Yukon. He had his career literally ripped to shreds by his colleagues because he was proposing humans in America 25,000 years ago. He had his research funding withdrawn. He could only continue on his own buck. Nobody was supporting him, but he was right. He was right, and this happens again and again. So when archaeologists of that type say, you know, Hancock is a pseudoscientist, I say, hang on a minute, you guys are the pseudoscientists. You guys sold us Clovis first for 50 years. You guys withdrew funding from research that might have exposed that lie earlier. You wouldn't let it happen. And that's not right. It shouldn't be that way. Archaeologists should not take the view that they have got a firm and fixed picture of the past, because actually we know so little about the past. They should always be saying this is our provisional position, but we are open to other possibilities. Because if they don't say that, those other possibilities are going to come along and kick them in the ass pretty soon. And that's what's happened with Clovis first. And Clovis first is not a small matter, because if human beings have been in the Americas for 130,000 years instead of for 13,000 years, why, there's 100,000 plus years that archaeologists just haven't looked at because of their preconceived notion that there was going to be nothing to find. There was actually a dictum against digging below Clovis levels. You know how
in archaeological strata that it's like a layer cake, and you have certain levels. And the view was, let's not waste research funds digging below Clovis because we know there was nothing before Clovis. What an idiotic, what a ridiculous position to take. Those archaeologists who did risk it and who dug deeper, like Al Goodyear at Topper in the Carolinas, they found human stuff going back tens of thousands of years earlier. So, you know, I think we're dealing with an ideological discipline, and I think it should be more provisional in what it says and in what it claims, and it should be less despising of people who consider other possibilities, because that's a useful thing to do. It's useful to consider other possibilities, even if they're wrong. Science should never get locked in a narrow channel and say everything outside the bounds of this channel is not subject to investigation. It's really a mistake.
Most Americans have no idea that ancient cities with advanced architectures once dotted the ancient North American landscape. Director Kennedy has since coined a name for such places.
What I call hidden cities. I use the term because these were very big places. There were more people, we now know, in Cahokia, across from St. Louis, than there were in London or Rome.
I mean, I was surprised when you went to America with this book, because I thought, what's in America? You know, and because of all of the assumptions I had made and what I had been taught as a kid, the narrative was simple. As little as I knew that there was nothing else there
Exactly.
to talk
This was the view, and this is why America is so interesting, because what we have in the Americas, North and South America, is a gigantic landmass, enormously rich in resources, just the kind of place where a civilization could emerge, just the kind of place where a civilization could emerge. So now we know that there were human beings there from 130,000 years ago, and we know that archaeologists haven't been looking at what they were doing. Now's the time to ask, what were they doing? What was going on in the Americas in that time? And again, a need for archaeologists to be more humble. How much have they really looked at?
Advanced ancient civilizations once inhabited the North American continent, and this fact was common knowledge just 200 years ago.
As Europeans moved northward from the Gulf in the 1530s and westward from Virginia after 1607 and westward from Plymouth Rock in 1620, they did learn that the place had been occupied for a long time by other people. George Washington saw major earthworks. The biggest architecture George Washington ever saw was created by Native Americans along the Ohio River.
They were viewed by the early settlers, of course. They were so plentiful that it wasn't a surprise to have it on your property. These things were common. Oftentimes, many of them were reduced to nothing because they were used for landfill in a growing village or a town or an upcoming city.
Thomas Jefferson was well aware that there were very, very big earthworks in the Ohio Valley, and he became aware, thanks to Lewis and Clark, that there were even bigger ones in the center of the continent, around Cahokia and St. Louis.
What were these ancient earthworks? Ancient city walls, buildings, roads, burial sites.
Artifacts of iron were found, artifacts of hardened copper, stone tablets with writing. Regular farmers just plowing their fields would really turn up literally bushel baskets of arrowheads, spear points, etc. And these things were commonplace. But the mounds that we see and the earthen banks and the ditches, to see them in such a great quantity and number, there had to be, just had to be, a very, very large population here at one time.
None of that, virtually none of that, presents itself to us. Yes, in some small park-like enclaves, but Downtown St. Louis doesn't have a mound center. Downtown Cincinnati doesn't have a mound center. Downtown Pittsburgh doesn't have a mound center anymore. Marietta is to some extent, Marietta, Ohio, defined by its ancient earthworks, but there's an awful lot that defines it subsequently. So the answer to that is, we don't see it.
All right, we're gonna get into this book. It's called Forbidding History, Prehistoric Technologies, Extraterrestrial Intervention. You know, you gotta pull out the babies out of all these books, you know. And The Suppressed Origins of Civilization by J. Douglas Kenyon. All right, exposing a scientific cover-up. Forbidding Archaeology. Co-author Michael Cremo talks about the knowledge filter and other means for cooking and academic books. J. Douglas Kenyon. In 1966, respected archaeologist Virginia Steen McTire and her associates on U.S. Geological Survey team, working under a grant from the National Science Foundation, were called upon to date a pair of remarkable archaeological sites in Mexico. Sophisticated stone tools, rivaling the best works of Cro-Magnon men in Europe, had been discovered at Huayatlaco, while somewhat cruder implements had been turned up at nearby El Horno. The sites, it was conjectured, were very ancient, perhaps old as 20,000 years, which according to prevailing theories would place them very close to the dawn of human habitation in the Americas.
We've been told for years
Yeah.
that there's no point really from an archaeological perspective in talking about the Americas. Why is this book so big, America Before?
Well, you see, it was a long-held view. It's unfortunate to say this about something that defines itself as a science, but archaeology is very dogmatic. And it was a dogmatic view held for more than 50 years, from the 1960s right through until past 2010, that the first human beings to enter the Americas had come in about 13,400 years ago.
Across to Alaska.
Through Alaska, through the Bering then land bridge, and into North America, and then into South America. And this was a doctrine. It was called Clovis first. And actually any archaeologist, and I can give you a number of examples like Jacques Cinq-Mars, who excavated Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, any archaeologist who came across a site where humans were older than 13,400 years was viciously attacked, like, as though the archaeological community was a pack of hyenas. They just descended on these dissenting voices and utterly destroyed their careers and withdrew their research.
You say in the book, the editor of Nature, one of the premier of scholastic magazines, characterized it as bullying and aggression against people who wanted to...
Exactly. Terrible bullying and aggression. And I often try to figure out why this is, and I think that maybe it is a natural human instinct to be territorial, and if your territory, your intellectual territory, is a particular idea about the past, you're going to tend to resist any ideas that contradict that. And if the stronger the ideas are, the stronger your resistance is going to be. And this, unfortunately, is the case, that for more than 50 years, evidence of humans in America much older than 13,400 years ago was simply dismissed, and anybody who attempted to go that way would not get research funding and would be ostracized by their colleagues and literally have their lives ruined. And this is most unfortunate, and it's not how science should proceed, because we now know that human beings have been in the Americas for tens of thousands of years before 13,400 years ago. In fact, the latest evidence puts them back more than 130,000 years in the Americas. And what that says to me is, if they were saying before that humans didn't come until 13,400 years ago and nobody should look, nobody should dig deeper, now we know they were there 130,000 years ago. That's more than 100,000 years of the American story that has not been told entirely because of the dogmatism of archaeology. And now reluctantly they're having to accept, all of the institutions are accepting, well, we're sorry, we got it wrong. But it's not just a matter of getting it wrong. It's a grave responsibility to be the profession that interprets the prehistory of humanity to the modern world. And it's a betrayal of that responsibility to be so dogmatic and to refuse to consider any possibility which doesn't fit with one's preconceived notions. And, you know, the net result is that we're left with 100,000 years of North American prehistory, which has been completely unstudied, and they're only now beginning to study it. And the evidence that's coming out, both in North America and South America, is absolutely stunning. All the old preconceptions are being
Who benefited,
overthrown.
though, apart from this professional class of archaeologists? And I know it's very multidisciplinary, this book, as you are saying, not just archaeology, genetics, biology,
yes, but
and also...
the new science in genetics is one of the things that's breaking the logjam, because genetic evidence is coming up which can't be explained by the pre-existing paradigm. For example, the pre-existing paradigm held that human beings had only entered America one way, that they'd come up through North Asia into Siberia, across the Bering Straits, which were then a land bridge, down through North America and on into South America. The problem that DNA has thrown up is that we have a very strong genetic relationship between Australasians, Aborigines and Melanesian people from Papua New Guinea, and certain tribes in the Amazon jungle. Now, if you could find that DNA footprint in Central America and in North America as well, it wouldn't challenge the existing dogma. But you can't. You only find it in the Amazon, and that rules out any possibility that they could have migrated through North and Central America to get to South America. They had to have crossed the Pacific Ocean. And furthermore, because very ancient skeletal material has been found containing this DNA, we know that this happened during the last ice age. So and this is horror for archaeologists, that humans could cross an ocean like the Pacific during the last ice age. They regarded it as absolutely impossible.
The book is called Forbidding History by J. Douglas Kenyon. All right. More than a century earlier, following the discovery of gold in California's Table Mountain and the subsequent digging of thousands of feet of mining shafts, miners began to bring up hundreds of stone artifacts and even human fossils, despite their origins and geological strata, documented at 9 to 55 million years in age. California State geologist J.D. Whitney was able to subsequently to authenticate many of the finds and to produce an extensive report. The implications of Whitney's evidence have never been properly answered or explained by the scientific establishment, yet the entire episode has been virtually ignored and references to it have vanished from the textbooks.
Some who authored the very first publications of the Smithsonian, or the earliest books on North American antiquities, described and illustrated things that would surprise most of us today.
Some people, such as Caleb Atwater and Squire and Davis, they believe the artifacts that they were finding around these mounds and cities and earthen structures, that this was representative of an advanced civilization. This is the very first publication of the Smithsonian Institution. This is the work that Squire and Davis were able to complete in the late 1830s, the early 1840s, in what's called the Ohio Territory, which primarily worked in the state of Ohio, showing the monuments and the vast cities and the greatness that they must have had.
Some of the sites that they surveyed and the maps that they made, as our only knowledge is these sites even existed now, because they were destroyed or they were intruded upon and their original configurations were greatly altered.
The real question is, why were these sites not preserved? And why are these advanced civilizations not more commonly known of today? The answers can be found in two surprising places. First, in the 19th century implementation of the doctrine of manifest destiny.
Next, read from the following, J.W. Powell's own words. This is a paper that he presented to the members of the Smithsonian at the Bureau of Ethnology. And the title on the talk is On Limitations to Use of Some Anthropological Data. And it's pages 73 through 86 of the 1879 and 1880 book that was published in the Smithsonian. And the quote is as follows: "Hence, it will be seen that it is illegitimate to use any pictographic matter of a date anterior to the discovery of the continent by Columbus for historic purposes."
Native Americans, even today, suffer from this policy, which effectively meant that Native Americans have no history.
This is the Smithsonian Annual Report 1882, 1883. This is John Wesley Howell. This is an original copy. John Wesley Howell in 1789. Again, this is Powell. This is the director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian Institute. He said this: artifacts found prior to Christopher Columbus's arrival would be considered illegitimate by the Smithsonian. Only the savage Indian culture would be observed, and this created the artificial barrier to science. Only the savage. Science was colluding with government because of commerce, and religion was involved. Now, why do I tell you all this stuff? Not because I'm an Indian expert or anything else. You got to do your own homework. I just found out about this stuff. I'm amazed by it. I don't know what the answer is on this. The reason why I bring it up is the stock is not bad. The soup went bad.
Many believe that the Native Americans had no written record prior to Christopher Columbus. This would make it prehistory, but nothing could be further from the truth.
As the archaeology developed as a new science and anthropology as a new science, and they would find these things, these evidences to show that there was a written language, that these people possibly did smelt iron, they did smelt copper, and they mined it, they carried and trade over great distances. These were signs of a higher civilization, and that higher civilization idea or theory coming from our educated scientific community of the day became directly in conflict with the manifest destiny ideas put forth by the U.S. government.
So I'm going to read from this book. It's called The Ancient Mystic Oriental Masonry, Its Teachings, Rules, Laws, Present Usages, which govern the order of the present day. Alright, so in this book, just wanted to show a couple of things here to correlate what we've been learning about the true old world. It says, we are not indebted to either ancient Egypt for either religion or masonry, but to America. So he's saying how they believe that all these symbolism came out of Egypt, and that from there it was spread to those other places like India and Persia. But it says we are not indebted to either ancient Egypt for either religion or masonry, but to America. It is a fact that at Memphis, Egypt, in the pyramids, under the guidance of the kings of the mystic rites of masonry, were worked many thousands of years ago. But at that time, Egypt and the continent of America were one and the same. Alright, so when they're talking about Memphis, Egypt, what Memphis are they talking about? Are they talking about Memphis in America? The real Egypt? We're about to read that right now. So listen to what they're saying. It says, in America, rediscovered in the 15th century and repopulated in the 17th, was recovered Egypt and the promised land. Alright? Egypt and the promised land. The promised land, right? The ancient Hebrews. Or the land of the constellation of the eagle.
As I go through the research, I find certain things ringing bells with me. I'm working in the Mississippi Valley. I'm at Moundville in Alabama. And I'm looking at a notice board. It's just the beginning of my research into this interesting culture in the Mississippi Valley. And the notice board has been put up by the site, and they're telling us about the site. And what they say is that the whole site was about afterlife beliefs, and that it was believed that on death, the soul of the deceased would ascend to the constellation of Orion, and then would pass through the constellation of Orion to the Milky Way, and then would make a journey along the Milky Way where it would face trials and tribulations and be judged on its behavior during life. The weird thing is, that's exactly the ancient Egyptian system of religion. It's exactly the system. It's too detailed to be a coincidence. What is that narrow star shaft in the Great Pyramid doing, if not pointing at the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt? To send the soul of the deceased up to Orion, then indeed a journey along the Milky Way, trials and tribulations, and a judgment. The same story exactly. But how do we explain that? Can it be a coincidence? No, I don't think so. Details are far too complicated.
Called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly. This was from New York, Harper & Brothers, Franklin Square in 1882. that Atlantis was the region where man first rose from a state of barbarism to civilization. And if you've seen my corn videos, if you haven't, I invite you to go watch them. You know, we see that agriculture helped the first civilizations begin. Agriculture, and it was corn. That's how we can trace corn way back 10,000 years. Also, point 4, he says that it became in the course of ages a populous and mighty nation, from whose overflowing the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi River, the Amazon, the Pacific coast of South America, all the way to the Pacific coast of South America. And what's there? Peru, right? The Mediterranean, the west coast of Europe and Africa, the Baltic, the Black Sea, and the Caspian were populated by civilized nations. That the gods, the goddesses of the ancient Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Hindus, and the Scandinavians were simply the kings, queens, and heroes of Atlantis. Alright, hijacked from the indigenous people of America. All these gods, right, they talk about. Where did they originate? And the acts attributed to them in mythology are confused recollection of real historical events. That the mythology of Egypt and Peru represent the original religion of Atlantis, which was sun worship according to them, right? And there was sun worship by some of the tribes that were in America. But we also know that eventually Jehoshua and King David drove some of these sun worshiping tribes out of Jerusalem and Hebron and all these places in the Bible. So yes, it is correlating with what we've read in the Torah. Point 8, that the oldest colony formed by the Atlanteans was probably in Egypt, whose civilization was a reproduction of that of the Atlantic island. So it says that from America, Atlantis, right, they went over to Egypt that we know today and colonized it there, and that's a colony of Atlantis, not the Egypt. All right, not the original Egypt. That the implements of the Bronze Age of Europe were derived from Atlantis. And if you know about the Michigan mines, you'll see that a lot of the Bronze Age metal that the Greeks and Romans used was coming from America, being mined up there. You can research that. Right? And it continues, says the Atlanteans were also the first manufacturers of iron. Point 10, that the Phoenician alphabet, parent of all European alphabets, was derived from an Atlantis alphabet, which was also conveyed from Atlantis to the Mayas of Central America. Those parts of America over which it ruled were, as we will show thereafter, Central America, Peru, and the valley of the Mississippi, occupied by the mound builders. Alright? Moreover, he tells us that this vast power was gathered into one. That is to say, from Egypt to Peru, it was one consolidated empire. We will see hereafter that the legends of the Hindus as the Diva Nahusha distinctly refer to this vast empire which covered the whole of the known world. Alright, so you just heard from this popular Masonic book. This is what they teach themselves, what they know, you know, and they told you when we talk about prehistory, we're really talking about America / Atlantis, right? So what is older? It tells us that Peru and Egypt was one empire, right? So if you watch my corn videos, you see that agriculture started out in Peru a long time ago. Like the first civilizations, the oldest structures and pyramids ever built were actually in Peru, in the site called Caral Supe. It predates Mesopotamia and the Egyptian dynasties. Alright, so look into it. The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Cremo. In the early 1950s, Thomas Ely of the Natural Museum of Canada found advanced stone tools in glacial deposits at Cheguanda on Mount Nitoline Island in northern Lake Huron. Geologist John Sanford of Wayne State University argued that the oldest Cheguanda tools were at least 65,000 years old and might be as much as 125,000 years old. For those adhering to standard views of North American prehistory, such Such ages were unacceptable. Humans supposedly first entered North America from Siberia about 12,000 years ago. Alright, so as you can see, their chronology and their history does not fit with what has been found many times. Alright?
You have made it your life's work to, and if some of the 9 million people who haven't read your books are watching, we still don't really understand or officially understand why civilizations have all grew up at the same time in different parts of the earth.
No, we don't.
But that's just a mystery. Whereas your life work is to say, there is a reason.
Well, my life's work has been to say that there's a forgotten episode in human history, and that once we take that forgotten episode into account, a high civilization, as many of the myths and traditions of the world attest, that existed during the Ice Age and was destroyed in the cataclysms that brought the last Ice Age to an end. I feel that that's a very neglected possibility by archaeology. Not just neglected, just absolutely ignored as a possibility. And I felt that my role has been to present solid, well-researched, thoroughly documented evidence which challenges that idea. Because if we are missing a very big part of our story, then we don't know who we are. We are lost in the modern world, and that's why I say it's a grave responsibility to be an archaeologist and to interpret the past to the present, because our ideas of who we are come from the story we've been told about that past. And now we know that an enormous area of the world, the whole of the Americas, was completely ignored, and it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization. And it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization. And it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization. I have a book in my shelves called History Begins at Sumer in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and that's been the idea of archaeology for a very long time, that civilization began in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia. But that idea
simultaneously in others.
And then all over the world. But what's beginning to change that is evidence, much earlier evidence of civilization, as we would call it. For example, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And it's pushing the date back right to the edge of the last ice age. And those very early sites show evidence of great advanced technology. And the only possible explanation, as far as I'm concerned, is that they inherited a legacy from an even earlier civilization.
So we've read in these last two books that, we can see that America / Atlantis, right, had a colony established in the other side, in Africa, in Egypt, modern-day Egypt today. And that's actually was built by Atlanteans or Americans, right? Because when we're talking about prehistory, we're talking about America, right? As the Masons teach us other. So this book correlates with that. I wanted to show you this book. It's called Civilization and the Ancient Egyptians by Katanga Bongo, which I believe is an African, but I could be mistaken. So it says in this book, the idea that it was Europeans who introduced civilization to Africa is one of the biggest historical myths. In fact, evidence from archaeology, oral history, traditional languages, and cultural practices strongly indicate that it was the South American Indians. Again, the South American Indians who introduced civilization to Africa. Who introduced civilization to Africa? According to this researcher, South American Indians. Some 7,000 years ago. Long before the Greek and Roman civilizations emerged, the South American Indians had introduced civilization to Africa, thereby making Africa the second continent in the world to become civilized. Spurred on by their South American Indian guests, the Africans built great empires that lasted for several thousand years at a time. Contrary to popular myth, in the Western world, the advent of Europeans destroyed civilization in Africa rather than made it. Alright, so as you can see, this researcher is stating what we're correlating about the origins of civilization and where it began. From the scholarly journal, The Foreign Quarterly Review, volume 18, published in London in 1837. The Foreign Quarterly Review has many volumes. I found this article in volume 18, around page 31, where the article starts, about a couple pages, not a lot, but it is a lot of information there in this article. So again, this is mostly a recount of an expedition done in 1805, 1806, 1807 by this guy named Dupax and his team, a French team hired by the Mexican Archaeological whatever institute or department or society. And yeah, so they are, a lot of this work, a lot of his illustrations is mentioned actually in Lord Kingsborough's Antiquities of Mexico. So this article mentions Lord Kingsborough, and his illustrations and his work in his books, Antiquities of Mexico. So just a little background of who Lord Kingsborough was, right? And Wikipedia tells us that he was an Irish antiquarian who sought to prove that the indigenous peoples of the Americas were a lost tribe of Israel. All right, so you see, not just my theory, we're not just making things up. This is actually ideas that these early settlers, conquistadors, conquerors, so-called explorers had because of what they were seeing and encountering when they came over here. Again, he wrote the book Antiquities of Mexico, comprising facsimiles. You know, facsimiles means an exact copy of ancient Mexican paintings and hieroglyphics, and is presented in the Royal Libraries of Paris, Berlin, Dresden, in the Imperial Library of Vienna, in the Vatican Library, in the Borgian Museum at Rome, in the Library of the Institute of Bologna, and in the Edokian Library at Oxford. The Monuments of New Spain by M. Dupax. All right, so that's volume 1 of cover, as you can see. So we have 7 volumes actually of this. 9 volumes of Antiquities of Mexico. And most of the first 3 volumes is all illustrations and codices and the Mayas or the Aztecs of Mexico, such as this. This is actually from Dupax. We're going to read his article, but I wanted to show you the illustrations he actually has in this book, Antiquities of Mexico, made by Lord Kingsborough. So again, you see Monuments of New Spain by M. Dupax from the original drawings executed by the order of the King of Spain. All right, so as you can see, this is some of his drawings. That looks like a speaker there. That's crazy. You can see, the cross, or the original crossing of the ley lines, the representation of the mark, the monument, the cross sticks, the sign, right? The emblem of the Garden of Eden. We're going to get to that. All right, so just so you guys can get a little background of the article that we're going to read. Try to get through the whole thing. All right, so we're just going to belly flop to this part right here. It says, we have said that this is an inquiry almost new to the public. We can deduce an extraordinary instance of the ignorance prevailing among literary and scientific men in general, of the immense sources of information from which they have been excluded. All right, this information has not been available to a lot of scholars. All right, by the voluminous pedantry employed upon the subject. It was after the publication of Lord Kingborough's work, that is to say in 1831, that a correspondent of the Literary Gazette announced a great discovery by a certain Colonel Galindo in New Spain. This now remember, New Spain, they're talking about that whole area of Mexico, Mesoamerica, a little bit of the Southwest U.S., right, and Florida. This gentleman, it says, going out one fine morning in the neighborhood of Palenque, stumbled on the ruins of an ancient city, nearly as wonderful in the architectural details of those of Egyptian Thebes. All right, they're not saying lower, they're not saying lesser than, they're saying as wonderful in the architectural details of those of Egyptian Thebes. So is this the original Thebes? Because we know this is the true old world, all right? And they're going to show us all this information that shows similarities between Egyptian, all right, people and all these Mayas and Aztec temples.
I want you to take a look at this. This is going to blow your mind. See this here? First, let me show you the Great Pyramid of Giza. You've seen this? One side of the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you measure it, It is from the bottom to the apex, 606 feet. That's important. That's an ancient unit of measurement. It's referred to as the stade. Now I want to show you this. These are the Newark earthworks. They're here in Ohio. Yes, Ohio. The earthworks are made, they're structures that are made now of earth that has been built up from the ground in a perfect circle. Here it is, a perfect circle and a perfect octagon. But they were built by the ancient Hopewell civilization. They date back from 300 BC to 400 AD. So let's look at these structures here. Bring this up. I want to show you something. If you square the inside of the octagon, here's a square and here's a square. If you square it, this is what surveyors do when they're measuring. They square the circle, and then they divide that area into 4 equal parts, or cubes, and then you find that each cube is made up of 606 feet, 606 feet, 606 feet, 606 feet. 606. It's made up of stades. Exactly the same. Now, if that's not interesting enough,
The first and strongest conviction, which will flash on the mind of every ripe antiquarian, while surveying the long series of Mexican and Toltecan monuments preserved in the various works to which we have briefly called attention, is the similarity which the ancient monuments of New Spain bear to the monumental records of ancient Egypt. Again, so their main purpose to writing this article, to doing this work, all right, is to show you, right, to show the antiquarian or somebody who likes history, who actually researches these things, is to call to the attention the similarity which these ancient monuments of New Spain, right, Mexico, bear to the monumental records of ancient Egypt. All right, similarity. Where is the true old world? While surveying them, the glance falls with familiar recognition on similar graduated pyramids, on similar marks of the same primeval Ophite worship, on vestiges of the same triune and solar deity, on planispheres and temples, which, though characterized by some distinctions entirely American, are not less worthy of the notice of the Egyptian antiquarian. All right, so he's saying, if you've studied the Egyptian archaeology, relics, history, then you would see automatically basically the same things over here in Mexico. Strong resemblances, similarity to the same history. All right. On relics, again, of palaces, at once noble in their architecture and beautiful in their proportions and decorations. On monuments, sepulchral, domestic, religious, or warlike, which deserve the designation of Cyclopean as much as any that are now extant in Italy or Greece. Now, we can, try to guess what they mean by Cyclopean, but he's going to mention how these giants, right? We know Cyclops, right? Those giants with the one eye. So, we just got to have an open mind with all this stuff and what do they really mean. And we got to dodge the hijack always. But there's a lot of info here that we've already been surfing the wave, the past videos and all the other videos you can find on YouTube regarding this subject. And we can have a little bit, we have a little bit of background to be able to discern what we're about to read. All right, so let's continue. On idols and sculptures, some of rude and some of finished workmanship, exhibiting different eras of civilization, and often presenting the most striking analogy in posture and gesture to the monumental style of sculpture and of statuary preeminent called Egyptian. Lastly, the eye of the antiquarian cannot fail to be both attracted and fixed by evidences of the existence of two great branches of the hieroglyphical language, both having striking affinities with the Egyptian, and yet distinguished from it by characteristics perfectly American. All right, so what does that tell you? I mean, it has affinities with the Egyptian hieroglyphic, but it has its own characteristics, right? Does the Egyptian hieroglyphs over there in Egypt have any kind of American affinity? Continuing, one is the picture writing peculiar to the Mexicans, and which displays several striking traits of assimilation to the anaglyphs in the historical tablets of the Egyptian temples. The second is a pure hieroglyphical language, to which little attention has been hitherto called, which appears to have been peculiar to the Toltecans, or some still more ancient nation that preceded the Mexicans, which was as complete as the Egyptian in its double constituency of a symbolic and a phonetic alphabet, and which, as far as we can judge, appears to have rivaled the Egyptian in its completeness. Again, they're saying that this language, right, this hieroglyphical system, not only symbolic in pictures, but phonetic. It sounds like how Egyptians would sound, right? The phonetic alphabet of the Egyptian. And also appears to have rivaled the Egyptian in its completeness, while in some respects it excelled it in its regularity and beauty. So it excelled, even more complex and beautiful than the Egyptian hieroglyphics, all right?
Here's the thing we should be asking ourselves. I don't know the story of these. Do you know that? Did you know that? Do you live in Ohio and did you know that? Why not? Were the American Indians wronged? Yes. Yes. And that's what we focus on in America, is we were bad to the American. Forget about it. It's in the past. The question should be the ones that the founders asked. Who are they? What knowledge do they have? Can you imagine the difference we would have now if we would put our differences aside and put our past in the past and concentrate on today and say, let's learn from each other. What do you have? What is that? What is that?
There were tens of thousands of architectural consequences that are now hidden behind our junk and our architectural achievements.
We now know that advanced ancient civilizations once inhabited North America, but have become lost to our modern memories, in part because of 19th century political and scientific agendas.
When following the course of the constellations, those immovably and perpetually fastened upon America are reached, it will appear that while all that is sublime in the historic past centers upon Egypt, all that is sublime in the prehistoric past centers upon America, Atlantis, and as the curtain which has hitherto concealed a prehistoric connection between the peoples of ancient Egypt and of America is lifted, it will be seen that the people of the eagle on the Nile being descended from the original people of the eagle on this continent. The twain are one in that prehistoric America was the original Egypt or Eagle Land prior to the mighty suspension in the days of Peleg, when the earth was divided and the great globe itself was nearly rent asunder. Again, that prehistoric America was the original Egypt, all right? The original Egypt was here in America, all right? And as I said right there, right before, it says that all that is sublime in historic past centers upon Egypt, right, of what they think of Egypt as today, but all that is sublime in the prehistoric past centers upon America or Atlantis, all right? The old original Egypt. The brief and cursory sketch which we have thus given for the convenience of the reader by way of preface or overture is indispensable to remove prejudices, all right? You must remove your prejudices, all right? They're going to show you, which may have been excited through the low estimate formed by Robertson and others. And this Robertson is one of those guys who says that, you know, you couldn't find any pyramids here and that all these mounds were just dirt mounted up together and grass grown on it. It wasn't really nothing. So he clearly had a plan and an agenda when he was writing his accounts of America. So this guy is saying in this article, you know, that this is because of what's happened and what has been said before, you know, that people are so, confused and indoctrinated, you know, and they have to remove their prejudices, as he says, all right? So that includes all of us. The real fact is that the depreciated view of Mexican antiquities results in a great measure from an anachronism carelessly allowed to establish itself among literary men. All right, so it has been allowed, who have not deeply examined the subject respecting two eras and two nations. All right, so this is still happening. This is what we're debating today when all these Aboriginal channels, right? Because this information has been kept from us, you know, we didn't have the right knowledge to have right reasoning or a clear perspective or orientation, right? But we already have gone through the other videos, right? But we've already established, you know, that at least in their secret circles, these literary men, right, these so-called Masonic, Freemasonic secret societies, and what they teach, right? We've gone over this, that, you know, when they came to America, they recovered ancient Egypt, the promised land, and that America was the ancient Egypt, or now, right, in Memphis, right, the real now, Mississippi. All right, so this is work, archaeological work, correlating what those guys already know, what is taught in these secret societies, right? It will be our province to extricate the subject from the confusion thereby caused. All right, you're stuck in confusion. A brief enumeration of a few facts will show upon what slight foundation Dr. Robertson must have built his careless appreciation of the monuments of New Spain. A mania existed in his time, as it does now, in favor of the stupendous importance of everything connected with the Egyptian monuments. Now, what is the simple fact? Pyramids, not inferior to Egyptian, exist in many parts of Mexican territories and of New Spain. And we can include, you know, all over the Americas, thousands of pyramids, all over all the continents of the Americas. All right. Some of these pyramids are of larger base than the Egyptian, and composed of equally permanent materials or greater materials. We know UB2 News, you know, shout out to him for putting out that video showing us how it was all concrete. King Drop also showed that it was all like the so-called Roman material or temples, right? It's not megalithic like in the Americas. Vestiges of noble architecture and sculpture are visible at Cholula, Otumba, Oaxaca, Mitlan, and Tlaxcola. The mountain of Texcoca or Texcosa is nearly covered with ruins of ancient buildings. The ancient town of Palenque exhibits not only excellent workmanship in the temples, palaces, private houses, and baths, but a boldness of design in the architect, as well as skill in the execution, which will not shrink from a comparison with the works of at least the earlier ages of Egyptian power. So the earlier ages, right? Ancient Egypt, right? The first dynasties, because ancient Egypt was in America. And later on dynasties, we're seeing from around the 16th, 17th, 18th dynasty, and Egypt was basically put on the other side, right? You know, they say Thoth built those pyramids over there, right? And he used this, and he went to the people of Cam or Ham, and, you know, from Atlantis, which was, we know, America, all right? In the sanctuaries of Palenque are found sculptured representations of idols, which resemble the most ancient gods of Egypt and Syria. Again, in the sanctuaries of Palenque are found sculptured representations of idols, which resemble the most ancient gods of Egypt and of Syria. Palinspheres and zodiacs exist, which exhibit a superior astronomical and chronological system to that which was possessed by the Egyptians. A superior, again, superior astronomical and chronological system to that which was possessed by the Egyptians. Let's not forget, this is from Harvard University Foreign Quarterly Review.
The history The history that has been erased in our nation, and in particular with the Native Americans, happened because it didn't fit the story they created, Manifest Destiny. It only works when Indians were savages, and they had to have savages for commerce and government to expand. The ancient artifacts prove otherwise. Why aren't we looking into those? Peter?
Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz? Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz? Because as you can see here, let me just zoom in a little bit, right? This is Louis Agassiz. Again, Geological Sketches, 1866, this version of it. And we're gonna go right to, basically, it's right in the beginning almost. And it says here, contents, page 1, volume 1, America the Old World. America the Old World. Again, firstborn among the continents. Firstborn among the continents. Though so much later in culture and civilization than some more recent birth, America, so far as her physical history is concerned, has been falsely denominated the New World. Again, has been falsely denominated the New World. This is not the New World. This is the true Old World. Hers was the first dry land lifted out of the waters. Hers, the first shore washed by the ocean that enveloped all the earth beside. And while Europe, listen to this, while Europe was represented only by islands rising here and there above the sea, oh, sorry about that, America already stretched in an unbroken line of land from Nova Scotia to the far west. Again, America, the Old World.
Shalom, shalom, my brothers and my sisters. This is El Dayo from One Nation, One Power, coming back to you one more time. Come on up out of here. I want to just give a shout out, to the Most High first, to the Ruach HaKodesh, and to his son Yeshaya, and to give honor out there where honor is due. Give honor where honor is due. I'm going to give honor today, and I want you guys to get a pencil and a paper. Get a pencil and a paper, because the Most High not going to keep trying to tell us the truth, and we keep trying to ignore it. Now, I want you to get a pen and paper. I want you to write down this brother's page. I want you guys to go subscribe to his page, because the Most High revealed to me through prayer that he using this brother to bring forth the history of the 10 tribes of Israel in America. And a lot of us descend from the 10 tribes. I did that video, Nothing Hid, to show you that they proved scientifically that the first people of the Americas was us. Now, I'm giving a shout out to Brother Kumero Ahu. I'm going to give you guys his name on YouTube. Capital K-U-R-I-M-E-O Ahu, A-H-A-U. Go subscribe to his page, because the Most High using him to give us our history back. In John chapter 10, get your Bible out. John chapter 10 and verse 10, it reads, "The thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly." Our history. This is the most important 1-hour video you will ever see in your life, Hebrews. This archaeologist, I told you guys, there are good people in every race. Don't let nobody tell you different. I'm going to say that again real slow. There are good people in every race. And the Most High used this brother to bring up this information to show us the ancient past of our homeland, Americana. I'm here today as the Most High servant to let all of you know that come on this page and follow me. I am imploring you, I am telling you, this is the most important piece of information you ever gonna get in your life as it pertains to our homeland. We are of the 10 tribes, and it's my job to help wake up the real 10 tribes who descend from the land of Shem and not Africa. Do you hear me? Yes, we got brothers and sisters in Africa, but I'm being sent now by the Most High to focus on us here in the Americas. Do you hear me out there? This is the most important 1-hour video you ever gonna hear in your life. So turn off all that foolishness you watching and pay attention and sit down. Make sure you got time and you absorb your ancient history that these devils have tried everything to hide. I told you guys, I told you. More truth of who we are coming out. That we far greater than these people teaching us. We far greater than these camps teaching us. We far greater. We ruled the world. The earth wasn't given into the hands of the wicked till over there in Job 9:24. Listen to this archaeologist and Brother Kameru use their literature to prove where we live and who we are. And then I just get a picture on Facebook sent to me that they just set up the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar in Las Vegas. What is Las Vegas? Is it just Las Vegas? Or is it something more? It's time, brothers and sisters, for us as the Hebrew Israelites, as the biblical Jews, according to Jeremiah 17:4, the Most High made us discontinue from our heritage. But now the Most High has saw fit to start to give back our heritage to us. Are we going to sit back and retain it and receive it? Or are we going to reject it? Now, if you got a spirit of the northern kingdom, this is going to bless your spirit. But I got brothers that's from the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi that want nothing to do with it. Good. Stay over there where you belong on your slave ships and just keep eating on that history, because we got a far greater history, because we left the land of Shem a long time ago. All of these dates and times that they be giving us, that they've been giving us, these people don't do nothing but lie. So I can't go with dates, because I know they lies about dates, but I know that evidence is evidence. Hello. Evidence is evidence, and now the evidence coming out. This Eldayo from One Nation, One Power endorsing Brother Kumeru Ahu. I don't even know the brother. Video, because we running out of time. We running out of time. Do you hear me out there? We running out of time. The clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. And the reason we running out of time is because the truth coming out. The truth coming out. This is why we running out of time. It's a race against the truth. It's a race against the truth. And I endorse this video. It is the most, I done watched it 3 times. And gonna watch it again after this. I'm gonna watch it and listen to it again before I go to bed tonight. Whenever I get something that's good, that's coming straight into my spirit, I make time for it. I don't answer the phone when I'm watching it either. I make time for it. It's my lost history coming back to me. And I want it all, baby. I want the steak of my history. I want the potato of my history. I want the chives. Oh, come on up out of here. I want my glass of iced tea with 3 cubes in it. I want it, I want it, I want it. You gotta want your history. This Eldayo from One Nation, One Power of the Northern Kingdom. Bringing you forth Kumero Ahu's video. And I'm praying that this bless your family, that this bless your soul. Because Americana is not what we've been taught it is. This Eldayo from One Nation, One Power. Listen to the archaeologist, who's a lot older than us, who telling on them. Who telling on them. There are good people in every race, and he telling on them. Shalom.